Well, let's stay with the issue around councils. If you look at the state of your finances, the amount of money you will have, you will know if you're going to be able to make it to the end of the month or until you get paid again. Now, if you look at the finances of our municipalities around the country, it turns out that according to the Auditor-General, 28% of our councils, that's nearly one-third, they have finances that are in such a bad condition they literally cannot carry on into the future as they are now. Danga Mongongo is the Program Manager for Well-Governed Cities at the South African Cities Network. Danga, good afternoon to you and thank you for your time. We all know that many of our councils are badly run. We all know that many of them have been badly run for a long time. Why are they still able to get away with it? Why are they still so badly run?
Thank you, Stephen. That's a very good question. I think what we're finding in our research at the South African Cities Network, even applying to the major metropolitan municipalities, which are the ones that we focus on, so that's the 8 biggest cities plus some Sunduzi, but there's a consistent thread across the whole municipal sector, which covers 257 odd municipalities, and that is that political instability really affects the ability of the city to manage this kind of controls they would need to have in place that the Attorney-General recommends, the Auditor-General, recommends for them in order to have good financial books, to be able to keep track of their assets. As we know, cities are responsible for service delivery, municipalities, and so they are only able to do that by maintaining water and electricity infrastructure, which delivers basic services to residents. And so with that political instability, it's important because it's the politicians who have oversight, which is overseeing the work of the administrations within the municipalities. So a council actually has to, through its various committees, its Section 79 committees, as well as the MPAC committees that have been recently set up in some municipalities, directed and tasked with overseeing the departments within the administration responsible for water, for sanitation, or for waste removal, whatever the case may be. And when you have political instability, they sort of take their eye off the ball on that very important oversight function because there's politicking, there's infighting among politicians and so on. So the politics trumps the administration, if you will. And I think that probably in a big picture story is the single greatest explanation for why, in fact, oversight hasn't led to the kind of more positive outcomes that we would have seen had there been the oversight that the Auditor-General suggests takes place, had it taken place.
We're supposed to now see an integrated development model, and at the same time there's a thing called the Integrated Urban Development Framework, a document that's supposed to basically manage the relationship between local government and the other spheres, and I presume particularly provincial and national government. Do those two things complement each other, or are they quite different?
They both complement each other, and they're also different. It's possible to answer in that way. So the Integrated Development Plan is the 5-year plan that every municipality in the country is required to have by law. And this is the plan for the development over a 5-year period of the municipality itself. And that is cascaded down into what we call a Service Delivery and Budget Implementation Plan, which is a 1-year plan by which the mayor is able to hold the municipal manager and their administration to account for the delivery over that 1 year. And the thinking being that 5 years of SDIPs, as we call them, should lead to the achievement of the 5-year integrated development plan, into which, by the way, citizens are expected also to have input. So that's one thing. The Integrated Urban Development Framework, which was adopted by Cabinet in 2016, is actually South Africa's urban policy, if you will. So it's our blueprint for how we would want to see the country achieve a number of things in the urban areas. And the reason it's so important is the majority of our population lives in urban areas and will continue to grow over time. And this Integrated Urban Development Framework is an implementation policy for achieving inclusive cities, so cities that include all of our populations, including the most vulnerable, so women, children, and people with disabilities. Productive cities, so cities that create opportunities for people who live within them to have jobs and sustainable livelihoods. And then sustainable cities, which is cities which are basically use resources in a sustainable manner, but also cities that are resilient, so able to anticipate things like the floods we saw in eThekwini recently, the droughts we're seeing in some of the coastal cities and so on. This policy is basically a blueprint to guide our cities towards achieving those goals.
There's a whole lot going on here, and in the end it always seems to come back to politics and leadership. And I understand sometimes it's tempting to change to actually change the structure, or to have this model or that model. Does any of that work if you don't change the political leadership? And by which I mean if you don't have proper, accountable and ethical leadership.
Well, it's interesting you mentioned that, because in any democracy, and this is not just true of ours, you get the leaders who we vote for, and there's no controlling who necessarily becomes a politician and who then runs for office. Having said that, though, and this is very important to tie back to the Auditor-General's report, is this particular report focusing on municipalities stressed the importance of political leadership, and indeed stressed also that this message that they have been saying over the last few years has not landed. And this message calls specifically for leaders with integrity, for transparency, for accountability, because if we don't see what's happening in the municipal books, then we can't actually hold municipalities to account. But also called for leaders to lead from the top. So in other words, to set the example from the top through the administration for what ethical, accountable leadership would look for. But one additional thing, and one that we call for within the South African Cities Network, is for all of society should hold our leaders to account. So it's one thing to have accountable leaders, but also all our urban policy, the white paper which we originally started with in 1998, calls for citizens to hold our leaders to account. So we have the right, not just during elections, but in between election times, to investigate that SDBIP that I mentioned, the annual performance plan for the city, to ask questions about the integrated development plan and how it's progressing in a city over the 5-year period that it's being implemented. So we have every right to go to council, to go and sit in at public meetings, which are indeed public, and I would urge all our listeners who have the chance and the time to attend, because they are public events, and we have the right to do so. So it's also very important that we as citizens take our responsibility in a democratic society for holding our leaders to account, and once again with the hope that our leaders themselves will also be accountable and transparent.
Danga, you talk about accountability, and I mean, this takes us to the next point. We're seeing more accountability in terms of political outcomes. In other words, people who perform badly are being voted out in councils. Do you believe that that is going to lead to better leadership? Are we going to see ethical leaders rising as a result of that process? Or are we just going to see more coalitions held together only by patronage?
Patronage, unfortunately, is the nature of the beast in politics, and I do think we can be very hard on ourselves in South Africa in terms of how we view patronage, and think it's a unique problem to us. It's a problem everywhere, I think. But as I say, when you have accountability and transparency, then we're able to see precisely where politicians are beholden. And one of the things about political competition, and particularly as we've seen in the local sphere, so no one could have predicted in 2016 that there would be so many changes in the leadership in the metropolitan municipalities as a result of certain voters, either ANC voters not voting for ANC in municipal council, or indeed other people voting instead for opposition parties. So it's a combination of those two trends, and both of which indicate that voters were either taking a decision by not voting or by voting in a particular direction to indicate what they wanted their leaders to follow. And the one thing that politicians have to be sensitive to at some point, if they're concerned and want to remain politicians, is the sentiments of those voters. So the question we can't control for is when those calculations become important enough that politicians say, oh, hang on a second, the voters are telling me they want me to do X, Y, and Z, and if they see I'm not either promising to do that and having promised to do it, not achieving it, then I'll be voted out. That's the mechanism of accountability that we have. And I think we are getting to a point of increasing political competition, as I mentioned, in the local sphere. It may indeed extend to the national and provincial spheres come the next general election. That your guess is as good as mine whether that will take place. But as I say, seeing trends that we've seen at the local sphere, that is entirely possible.
And Danga Mongongo, thank you, Program Manager for Well-Governed Cities at the South African Cities Network. Do appreciate the time.